This election is all about women coming together and showing their power at the ballot box. Who you vote for is private, but everyone can check whether you voted or not. That means your friends, your coworkers, even your mother can check and see whether you voted. Don't let the women in your life find out you let them down. Vote by mail, vote early in person, or vote on November 5th.
Paid for by Story Network Foundation.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. Thanks so much for joining. Oh, my God. Just, 3 days to go until the election. I want this just to be over. It is so nerve-wracking. I know we're all on pins and needles to see what happens Tuesday night, and we may be counting ballots for another week after that, given these new voter rules. But I hope, by the way, and obviously you all know I've worked for Donald Trump for 8 years as an informal senior advisor to him on the economy. But win or lose, and I think Donald Trump will win. But I just want it to be, I don't want this to drag on for days and days and weeks, and some kinds of, for even a month or more. I want this thing to be over. I hope there's a decisive winner in this election, one way or the other. We are just so polarized right now, and I think a squeaky win for one candidate or the other is going to cause problems for our country. We need to try to come together as best we can. Regardless of who wins the election. Well, great to be with you as always. We are on every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. We follow the great Larry Kudlow, who's on for 3 hours before me. And so that is a great privilege for me to follow my friend Larry Kudlow. Now, got a really fun show this afternoon. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about the economy. I am not going to have time this week, as I did last week, to take your calls. So I apologize for that. But we just have a full lineup today. So much to talk about on the economy and politics. And by the way, if you're new to this show, thank you for joining. We call it the More Money Show because we want to help you make more money. But we also talk about politics. We talk about economic policy. We talk about the financial markets. We talk about anything that has to do with money on this show. And so I am going to start with a little bit of politics here and give you some of the latest, some of the latest numbers on what is happening with this race. And this is as of Friday night. So Friday night. So these are some of the latest numbers you're going to find. In the betting markets right now, Donald Trump is a 63% chance of winning. So he's not quite a 2-to-1 favorite at this point, but it's pretty close. Now, by the way, 63% is not a humongous lead. It's maybe being up by a touchdown in the fourth quarter. And by the way, I saw what happened. I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and you probably saw what happened to the Chicago Bears last weekend, where the Bears had a 3-point lead with 6 seconds on the clock, and the Washington Redskins, the Commanders, I still call them the Redskins, they had to throw a 65-yard Hail Mary pass into the end zone, which almost never works. The quarterback flings one, amazing arm that guy has, throws the ball 63 yards to the 2-yard line. The ball bounces around, falls right into the hands of the Commanders receiver, and the Bears lose on the last play of the game on what we call Hail Mary pass. I don't want Kamala Harris to win on a Hail Mary pass. You know what I'm saying? I want this thing to be over, but I really want it also to be a win for Trump. I think he would do amazing things for our country. And I know that people listening to this show have very different opinions about Trump, about Kamala Harris, about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., about all the political candidates. But as an economist, I think I can tell you with almost certainty that if you're voting on the pocketbook, if you're voting for the kitchen table issues about whether you can afford things, whether you're going to have a job next year, whether you'll get a raise next year, whether you can pay your grocery bill, whether you can pay your credit card bill, there is very little question in my mind that on those issues, Donald Trump is the superior candidate. Now, maybe you care a lot about abortion or social issues or, other kinds of issues, environment, and you can rank those issues that you care the most about. But most polls do show that the number one issue for the American voters is the economy. The number two issue is immigration. And on both of those, I don't think there's any doubt that Donald Trump has the superior record and agenda as well. Don't forget, Kamala Harris, who was recently endorsed, by the way, by The Economist magazine. And I mean, I almost fell off my chair laughing when I read the Economist magazine endorsement of Kamala Harris. They said, she's the centrist candidate. She will run a centrist policy. Centrist? Centrist? I mean, you can love Kamala Harris or hate her or be, somewhere in between. But the one thing you can never say about Kamala Harris is she's no centrist. She had the very most left-wing record of anyone in the United States Senate. Out of 100 senators, she was the first most liberal of all of them. And that includes Elizabeth Warren, of Massachusetts, includes even Bernie Sanders. I'm telling you the truth, folks. She had a more liberal socialist voting record than Bernie Sanders, who's an avowed socialist. He even admits he's a socialist, but even he wasn't as radical as Kamala Harris was when they were both in the Senate together. So to say, say what you will about Kamala Harris, she is no centrist when it comes to the economy or other issues. One of the things that really excites me about Donald Trump is just the way he is connecting with middle-class voters. And I think that a lot of you listening to this show probably watched or maybe even attended the rally that Trump had last weekend at Madison Square Garden. Amazing event, 24,000 people, not one seat left, as one of my friends joked. The only last time that it was sold out like this was when Billy Joel performed there. But the point is that it was packed to the rafters, great people. And I saw blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians. I saw young people. I saw college students. I saw senior citizens. I saw people in wheelchairs. It was a real panoramic view of America. It was an exciting day. I hated that statement by the comedian who said something disparaging about Puerto Ricans, and I hated that. And there's no place in politics for that. But I guarantee you that does not represent Donald Trump's views. But the thing that was really amazing to me about that event last Sunday, and I bet a lot of you were there on the streets. In other words, I thought what was most amazing is not what happened inside Madison Square Garden, but what happened outside of Madison Square Garden, where the motorcade that took Trump from his office at Trump Tower down, what is that, about a mile or so to Madison Square Garden, those streets were so packed with people behind the guardrails of the street. It must have been 9 or 10 people deep, just so people could catch a glimpse of the Trump motorcade going by. And I haven't seen, it was almost like it was, victory over the Nazis in World War II. I've never seen such a celebration, and people were in a happy mood. Dare I say it, they were joyful of the prospects that Donald Trump will win. So that was a wonderful day, and Trump did an amazing job at that event. And one of the people who spoke, though, that I wanted to mention to you, who I think is going to play a hugely influential role in the Trump second term, and I believe we will have a Trump second term starting in January, is Elon Musk. And Elon is really an amazing person. He is one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time. He's an incredible business mind. Virtually everything he touches turns to gold. And he is going to, as you all have heard, he is going to run the Government Reform Commission. And that is a commission that will try to find hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, and not millions, billions of dollars of waste in the United States federal government. And it's out there. We now have a $7 trillion budget, or just a little under $7 trillion. And Elon Musk thinks we can save $2 trillion. Now, I think that's a bit of a stretch. And I think there's a lot of waste in the budget, but I don't think we could cut $2 trillion. But I do think we could cut $1 trillion. $1 trillion. That's one with 12 zeros. So that's a big number. And I think it could be done in a way that would not affect anyone's benefits. You know, we're not cutting your Social Security benefit. We're not cutting your Medicare benefits. We're not cutting, road funding. We're not going to sacrifice our national defense. We're not going to hurt our schools and our public services. But I'm just talking about the waste, the redundancy, the amount of pork barrel projects that have no place in a federal budget. Where we're paying for sewer systems in some town over here, or we're paying for, bridges over there. Remember the bridge to nowhere in Alaska? Some of us of an older age may remember that, where we spent $300 million on a bridge that used to be crossed by about 8 cars every day. So there is huge amounts of waste in the budget. There's $300 billion of green energy slush fund money. Well, we could just eliminate that. Okay. You know what? Sorry, folks. We don't have enough money for that. We're running a $2 trillion deficit. We're not going to have this money on that. There's still somewhere between $50 and $100 billion of unspent COVID money. Sorry, we're not going to spend it. We're going to return it back to the Treasury so they can pay their bills. There are literally 200 different job training programs. There's 50 different programs for nutrition assistance. The left hand of the government doesn't even know what the right hand of the government is doing. You have programs that date back to the 1920s and 30s that were created by Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression, and they still exist. They have no place in the budget. But what is it that Ronald Reagan used to say that was so appropriate, that the closest thing to immortality on this earth is a federal government program. And it is so true. And what I'm telling you is I think Elon Musk is exactly the right guy to scour through that budget and to go through these agencies and go through the bureaucracies and cut. And I guarantee you, we can find $1 trillion of savings. And folks, you will not even miss that money. You won't miss it. You won't even know that it's gone. By the way, only 10% of federal workers are working full-time on the job today. Did you know that? And these federal workers can make $150,000, $200,000. They're playing golf, they're playing tennis, or they're going to the movies. They're cheating taxpayers. So we're going to find ways we can make the economy much more economical, just like a businessman would. If you find waste in your business, you get rid of it. And yet in Washington, when they're wasting money, we call that a stimulus. It's the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. So people ask me, what would you like to do if Donald Trump wins the White House? Because I am fairly close to the president. And by the way, I would do anything the man asked me to do. That's what you do if the president asks you to serve the country. But what I'd like to do, I was thinking, is maybe serve as the director of this government reform commission, because I know we can go through these agencies and find so much waste, so much fraud, so much money is stolen from the U.S. government. We can, we're not going to allow 80,000 IRS agents. We're going to simplify the tax system. We can cut the number of IRS agents by 2/3 because it's so simple and easy. People won't be able to get away with fraud, and they won't be incentivized to have fraud because we'll have lower tax rates. So very excited about that. I've never met Elon Musk. I hope I do meet him in the months ahead, because I think Trump is going to be president, and that's going to be one of his first appointments. We're going to get back. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to talk a little bit about tax policy and tariffs, because I have some strong views on this, folks. This is in my strike zone. This is what I do for a living, is study tax policy and trade policy. And I want to walk you through what Trump is talking about and see if you agree. And by the way, I don't agree with some of the things that Trump says on trade and taxes. So I want to tell you where I agree with him, where I don't. And I think it might be illuminating to you in terms of how we could do the ultimate tax policy. And incidentally, I know, because I get so much email from folks, you're emailing me every week about this is the best tax plan or that plan. I get dozens every week. I'm going to give you the Steve Moore tax plan, and it's not that much different from what Donald Trump has proposed. This is Steve Moore. You're listening to the More Money Show on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and we will be right back.
Who you vote for is private. But everyone will know if you voted or not. It's a matter of public record. And when this election is decided by a handful of votes in your neighborhood, you don't want your friends and family to know you let them down. Voting is easy. Make a plan to vote by mail, vote early in person, or on November 5th. Make sure people know you did your civic duty.
Paid for by Story Network Foundation.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio, where we talk a lot about politics. We talk a lot about the economy and how you can make more money. And I do obviously want to talk about politics today because we have one of the most important elections of our lifetime coming up in 2 or 3 days. And so I naturally asked two of the smartest people I know about politics, one being the great Rich Lowry. You all know Rich Lowry from Fox News. You all know him as the longtime editor of National Review magazine, a must-read conservative journal. And then John Fund, who I've known for, 30 years. He and I worked together for 10 years at the Wall Street Journal editorial board. He worked there much longer than that. He also contributes to National Review. He also works with me at Unleash Prosperity. And the two of these guys know more about politics than just about anybody in the country. So, John and Rich, thanks for joining. Rich, I want to start out by asking you a big think kind of question. We've now had, it looks like this is going to probably be a very close election. We don't know. Maybe it could be a Trump blowout, but I think it'll be close one way or the other. And it could be decided by less than 1 percentage point. And this, if that were the case, think about this. This would be 4 of the last 6 elections have been decided by, a few 100,000 votes out of 100 million and more voting. Why do you think that is?
We're just a divided country, pretty much 50-50 have been for a while. And a lot of people complain about divisions and say how much bitter and poisonous it has been, maybe compared to some times in American history. But it's also not unusual for us to be bitterly divided politically, which kind of comes with the territory as a free republic that's always been fractious and always had fierce debates going back to Hamilton and Jefferson, right at the beginning. So I don't think we should be scared of fierce debate, and we've had a lot of it. And I've kind of favored Trump the whole time. So I think he's the conditions. People are unhappy with the condition of the country, and he's way ahead on the economy, which is the most important issue. But you look at the polls, and it's functionally a tie. Yeah,
it's amazing. So, John, I'd like you to take a swing at that question. I'm not quite as sanguine as Rich is in terms of how divided we are today. I think I think we're more divided than we've been as a country at any time in many, many, many decades. But what say you?
Well, institutions have all taken a hit. One of the things that Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, said in explaining why his paper wasn't going to endorse a candidate is that the trust in the media has collapsed. It's now below that of Congress, which is pretty bad. And other institutions are suffering. I think the biggest problem we've had is since the end of the Cold War, both parties have had an opportunity to put in policies that would have made Americans more secure, more prosperous, and more able to manage their families and handle their daily relations.
Right. Yep.
They both failed for a long time. And that's what the Trump election in 2016 was. There was a concomitant event in Britain called Brexit. People were just fed up. They don't trust the two parties. We have an unusual system. Most countries have a parliamentary system. We're basically stuck with two parties because the third party gets shut out by the two parties. And as a result, there's been a resorting of the parties. And that is a very messy process, as Rich indicated. Very messy. And I think it will get sorted out in the next 3 or 4 years, but we have to go through this first.
One of the things I find fascinating, Rich, is that, if you read the Wall Street Journal or read a lot of the media, they'll say, oh, the economy's so good. We got all these upward, indicators and so on. But then when you look at the American people and their attitudes about the economy, as you know, about 2 out of 3 or so rate the economy as poor or fair at best. And so there's this kind of disconnect between what the media and what these kind of bubble cities like Wall Street and New York are saying, and D.C., obviously, and how people in Main Street America are thinking.
Yeah, so a couple things going on there. One, I mean, there's been an attempt to kind of shame people into feeling better than they do about the economy, which hasn't worked, because this is an issue where you can't really convince people. It's what they experience in their everyday lives. And we've had stagnant real wages, right? The wages haven't been able to eclipse inflation, stark contrast to the first 3 years of the Trump administration. Right. And then prices, if it costs more to buy eggs at the grocery store, costs more to buy a house, costs more to buy a car, you're going to feel that, and no one's going to talk you out of what you experience. Right. You see the number, you remember what it used to be, and you're going to notice.
And so, John, you've got this, the Economist magazine, John, I don't know if you saw this, they endorsed Kamala Harris. And look, they can endorse whoever they want to. But I thought what was really interesting, I actually did read their article about why they did, John. And what they said was Kamala Harris is the centrist candidate in this race. Now, look, Donald Trump is out there on some issues. I would certainly admit that. But Kamala Harris, a centrist?
Well, she might be a centrist if the political universe you were talking about was San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley.
That's right.
That she has spent her entire adult life in outside when she moved back from Canada. Other than that, that's the most insane, preposterous reach I've heard in months. I'm still. The Economist used to be an intelligent magazine.
I know. I mean, it's sad. I mean, Rich, I mean, it's laughable that maybe these Brits just don't know anything about America, or they don't know. She has a more liberal voting record when she was in the Senate than Bernie Sanders. I mean, out of 100 senators, Rich Lowry, she was number one, the most liberal. How is that centrist?
Yeah, no, of course. Well, she's tried to run away from as much of that as she can. I mean, she's right. Basically totally disavowed everything she said and said quite passionately and seemingly sincerely in 2019 and 2020. And I think this is one of the reasons, Steve, if she loses, a big reason is going to be she achieved no separation from Joe Biden. And I think it's because she was disavowing everything from 4 or 5 years ago. So then her campaign concluded she couldn't further disavow things that she'd done or been part of over the last 3 years. So she got stuck with Biden. And in a change election, that's a terrible place to be. And she just tries to make the argument. It's not really an argument. It's assertion. Well, I'm not Joe Biden. Well, sure. No one else is Joe Biden either. That doesn't mean that you're not going to govern exactly the same way he has.
Well, John, I mean, she has said multiple times, I was instrumental. In fact, the Biden people say she was instrumental in many of the major decisions that were made by Biden. And she also has not, she's been asked multiple times, John Fund, what would you have done differently? And we're still waiting for the answer.
Look, I'm from San Francisco. I know Kamala Harris personally, not well, but I've had several conversations with her. She's not stupid. What she is, though, is terminally insecure. And frankly, has spent so much time in the bubble of San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, she really doesn't understand mainstream America, and she certainly doesn't even know what the other point of view is. Therefore, she has this constant catch in her throat where she can't talk, she can't explain what she believes, because in her heart of hearts, she knows that no one would vote for her if she articulated what she believes.
So, Rich Lowry, to change subjects for just a minute, we just got a couple minutes before we take our break. What worries me most as a Trump guy is this gender gap. And you and I have been in politics for a long, long time. And as I'm looking at it right now, I don't think we've ever seen as big a gender gap where women tend to just dislike Trump and men do like Trump. And so the question I have for you is, if you're running the Trump campaign with 48 hours to go, what's your closing argument to women tend to be much more in favor of abortion rights and things like that? And that issue probably has hurt Trump a bit. So if you were kind of advising Trump, what would you tell him to say to women in terms of why they should vote for him?
Well, I think the women that Trump's going to get, they care about security as much as anyone else, and they care about economic growth as much as anyone else.
They pay the bills, Rich. In the Moore household, my wife pays the bills.
Same thing. We'd be totally lost if I had to pay the bills in the Lowry household. So that's completely true. But this it's a gender gap both ways, right? And there's a massive advantage for Trump among men. And if he wins, it'll be because all these podcast interviews with a lot of podcasters. I don't know about you, Steve, how with it you are with Gen Z culture, but a lot of podcasts
Not much.
I've never heard of and I'm never going to listen to. Trump went on all those shows, for hours, literally, some of them 2 hours, 3 hour interviews, and the kind of the unconventional figures who are now around Trump and have endorsed them, Elon and RFK Jr. can reach these disaffected males who are probably unresponsive to conventional political appeals, but maybe responsive to unconventional ones.
So we've just got a minute or so left, John Fund, but the Wall Street Journal had a very interesting editorial a couple of days ago, and I happen to agree with it, which is I don't understand why the Trump campaign is not reaching out to Nikki Haley. She's a among a lot of, especially Republican women, she's very popular. And it just seems like if he loses, that might be that they'll look back and say, I think she should have been chosen as VP, but what's going on there? Is it just personal?
No, it's personality. Let's be honest.
Okay.
For a lot of Americans, they would not want to invite Donald Trump home for dinner. Now, I know he can be charming. I've witnessed that. Rich has witnessed that. But his basic approach is, I'm going to dominate you, and I'm going to insult you. What he said about Liz Cheney, I think, has been mischaracterized yesterday, but it sounds awful. He hates Nikki Haley, obviously, and he's too proud to step down and actually say, I'm leading a country. I'm not leading a grudge.
Right. Great point. John Fund, Rich Lowry, can you guys stay out for one more segment? Love this conversation. This is the More Money Show on WABC, folks, and we'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. We're having a fascinating conversation on WABC Talk Radio with two of the smartest political minds in America, Rich Lowry, the editor of National Review, and John Fund, who worked many, many years as political columnist with the Wall Street Journal. He now writes for National Review. He works with me at Unleash Prosperity and has written many books on elections. And so, John, let's start with this issue about whether you think that these will be clean elections. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of anxiety on both sides of the aisle in terms of whether we can make the mail-in balloting safe. How do you see it going?
The theme of all of my books on elections is that too many places in our country, especially major cities, have election systems that are so sloppy, rules that are so loosey-goosey, procedures that aren't followed properly, that you can't tell where the incompetence ends and potential fraud might be.
Right.
And that's the problem we have. Look, we've seen that a bunch of fake registrations in Pennsylvania have been traced back to a Democratic voter mill in Mesa, Arizona, of all places. Mm-hmm. We've seen that there are election officials that have in Bucks County that had to be ordered by a judge to allow people who are standing in line and were turned away to vote early. We've seen all kinds of things, and they tend to move in one direction. Vote suppression is real, but I suspect that the source of the vote suppression, shall we say, may lodge in a different place than the mainstream media finds it.
And do you think that we will have a winner on election night?
The odds of that have gone up the last few days, I think. For your audience, if Georgia and North Carolina, which report by 9 o'clock most of their votes, if Trump wins both of them, it's going to be a very good night for him. If Kamala wins both of them, very good night for her. If they're split, it'll be a long slog with probably some recounts. But I think the odds of having a winner by 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday are now over 50%.
Yeah, I hope you're right, one way or the other. I don't want to see something that goes on. I don't think the American people do either. Rich Lowry, I went to the Madison Square Garden event last Sunday. I don't recall whether you were there. There were so many people there that I don't remember. But anyway, I thought what was really interesting, I said this at the top of the show, was just the throngs of people outside of the Madison Square Garden on the streets, just all the way from Trump Tower all the way to Madison Square Garden, people lining up, 10 deep, almost like we'd won World War II. And it's amazing. And I talked to a lot of these people, I just randomly talked to people. It was really kind of a cross section of Americans. I mean, this idea that Trump only represents the rich is so wrong. I mean, you had senior citizens, you had young people, college students, you had blacks, Hispanics. It really was kind of a rainbow coalition. And I think that's something that, in fact, and let me make one other quick point, and then I like your response on this. I made this point on the show, on one of the Fox shows yesterday, that I've been traveling around a bit, to the major areas, the cities. And when you go into the suburbs, the really wealthy suburbs of these cities, you see the yard signs as Kamala, 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 Kamala. Then when you go into the kind of working class areas of the cities, it's Trump, 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 which is sort of the opposite of what most people think.
Yep. No, it's an ongoing sorting by education, where first it was working class whites, and now we're seeing definitely Latinos coming on board. I have a friend who's works some races in South Texas, and he says Trump's number there among Latinos and in those heavily Hispanic districts will be higher than it was in 2020. So I think that's definitely happening. I think we need to wait to see on black males, but there's certainly been polling that indicates that's happening too, and it's part of this educational sorting. But usually, Steve, right, you're a Republican and you want to build a crowd, and know you can build a crowd, do your event in Dallas, right, or something. But Trump can go to these blue areas like New York City. There was a really striking one in New Jersey as well. I forget the venue. John probably remembers over the summer. Maybe you do. But massive crowd. So I thought the Garden Rally was inspired, except for giving the mic to the comedian at the beginning.
But
Trump's remarks at the end were as upbeat and on message as he gets. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I think, John, that really has been the political shift that's happened in your and my lifetime. If you look at when Reagan won, the richer the district, the more likely it was to vote for, Reagan and the Republicans. Now today, it's the more middle class centrist, middle class working class a town is, the more likely it is to vote for Republicans, and that's pretty an extraordinary change in voting patterns.
Absolutely. And I think it's a division between people who are comfortable enough to have luxury beliefs, whether it's on social issues or a variety of things, and they also go to cocktail parties where they want to fit in, and people who are struggling but are aspirational. They want to live the American dream. They want to earn enough to have a house. They want to get a new car every few years. And those kind of people are increasingly shut out by the sort of mercantilist capitalist system we have, which is not so much free market as it is, benefits those who have and shuts down the ladder of opportunity to those who don't have.
I couldn't agree more. So, Rich Lowry, another point I'd like to ask you about is in terms of Elon Musk, who's my new hero. He's been right on message. What he's saying is, look, we have to get rid of the redundancy and inefficiency and fraud in government. We have to run this, government with the efficiency of a business, and he's a pretty efficient guy. What do you make of him? And I'm hearing that Trump really is quite enamored with him, wants to have him in a high-level position. But I just find it to be a fascinating development.
Yeah, it is. National Review ran a famous cover in the 90s with Rush Limbaugh on the cover, and the line was "the leader of the opposition." I think that's kind of Elon Musk now. At least he's an important symbol of the opposition. His acquisition of Twitter was a huge event. His bully pulpit he uses on Twitter and elsewhere is hugely important, and he's the symptom of people who are on the left, or in his case in the middle, who have been driven right by the insanity and illiberalism of the left. Bill Maher is an example. He's not a Trump supporter. Glenn Greenwald is an example. He's also not a Trump supporter. But Elon and RFK are, and this is a case of the tent getting bigger.
So, John Fund, as you know, you helped us with this study that we did on the elites in America and how different they are in their attitudes about America than just average Americans, a lunch bucket Joe, so to speak. And, you have these elites who say they're not really pro-America. They're not very patriotic. They think there's too much freedom, not too much government in America. They think we should take air conditioners away from people. And that just isn't where real America is. What do you make of that?
Well, the progressives say we have to trust the science, except when it comes to COVID. The progressives say we have to trust the experts, except when they're wrong, which they often are. Right. The The progressives say that we have to trust authority even though when it's constantly abused. And now we're seeing that it's being abused by places like the FBI and the CIA. And you know what? The left, which used to favor civil liberties and worry about government surveillance and censorship, are now embracing the bureaucrats in the intelligence state. I mean, so it's almost like a funhouse mirror. Everything is distorted. And a lot of Americans believe that the elites in this country have basically become more loyal to themselves and their class than the interests of the country as a whole.
Great points. That's John Fund, of course, who has been involved in politics for 30 or so years, maybe more, and used to work at the Wall Street Journal and National Review. And Rich Lowry, back to you, if I may. If Trump wins, what would you say should be what would you like to hear him say in his speech when he accepts the presidency? What is his message to the American people?
That he's going to fix it. That has been broken. Right. It's what we've had a huge contest over the last week or so, or maybe longer, just whose gaffes matter more and who's made a gaffe. Yeah, right. The real debate is Kamala saying he has an enemies list and I have a to-do list, and Trump saying she broke it and I'm going to fix it. So no acrimony, some graciousness, some unifying rhetoric, and focusing on the substance and what he needs to get done. And assuming he comes in with a Republican Congress, he's got 2 years. The time is ticking, literally from Election Day to start moving on this stuff.
Great point. John, final word. We've got about a minute left. So I agree with what Rich said. I'm just going to add one thing. I don't know if Trump has it in him, and I admire Trump. I've been around him a lot. But to be magnanimous and to reach out in a sincere way to, the other side and really, mean it. Can he do that?
Steve, you would think it would be in his self-interest to tell himself the following: I will never again run for office. I never again will have to go through this.
Right.
I will have made the biggest political comeback in American history.
Right.
No one except Grover Cleveland has ever pulled this off. I will have survived 4 indictments.
Right.
I will have overcome all odds. At this point, I'm king of the world, and if I can't be magnanimous now, am I really a good king or a vengeful king? And I think if it's in his self-interest, he will say to himself, now at age 78, maybe I can try to play good king.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
It's amazing, Steve, to underline John's point. We'll see, we don't know. We'll see how it turns out Tuesday, Wednesday, or whenever it's decided. But
right.
For Trump to be on the cusp of the presidency again, after all that John outlined, and even more, is extraordinary. It's just remarkable in and of itself.
And he's working. I have to tell you, having been around him a bit, I mean, folks, you cannot imagine how this guy goes 16, 18 hours a day. I've never seen anything like it. Rich Lowry, John Fund, thanks so much. Great conversation, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC, and we'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC on a Saturday afternoon. We are on every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. and so appreciate my loyal listeners because we have a lot of them, and I love hearing from you folks. So please get in touch with me. I love hearing back. I do read all of your emails. I read your texts. I read your mail. Really appreciate it. It means the world to me when I hear back from people. And so many brilliant comments come in. And next week, we will take calls. We will take calls next week. I apologize. I just can't. We couldn't do it this week because we were so jammed up with so much information, about 48 to 72 hours away from this incredibly important election. What I wanted to talk about now is talking about the economy and what kind of condition is it in, because we did get a very lousy jobs report on Friday, and it was very disappointing, and it's hard to see anything good in this report. And it really makes me nervous, and it should make you nervous about what direction this country is going in terms of our economy. We'd had a streak of pretty good jobs reports for the last couple of years, and then boom, crash. we get zero jobs, well, 12,000 jobs, but all of those were just government jobs. The private sector actually lost jobs. We lost 100,000 manufacturing, construction, and business service jobs. 100,000 lost. How is that helping unions? How is that helping? These are the kind of good paying, middle class, working class jobs that are disappearing. And, it was just not too long ago, Biden was boasting about all the manufacturing jobs he's brought back. Where are they? What's happened to them? So that was really disappointing. And you've got the government that just keeps growing and growing and growing. So, for example, this week, we got a GDP report, and it was pretty good. It was a pretty good report. We got 2.8% growth, which is a pretty good, headline number. But then when you look behind the numbers, what you find is the private sector grew at 2.5%, which is decent, but the government grew by 5%, twice as fast. And that's been the pattern throughout the Biden presidency. Government, 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 government. And by the way, even those GDP numbers are misleading because they don't count the fact that so much of the spending, even the private sector that's going on, is spending that it just derives from the government handing out free money. So yes, personal consumption was up. So why is personal consumption up when inflation is so high? Because people are getting all these checks from the government. And if you're not getting a check from the government, you're probably a sucker because everybody else is. And there's an old saying, everybody can't be entitled to everybody's money. And that's what's happening in this country. We're moving down the path to a more socialist economy where we're not incentivizing people to work. We're not incentivizing people to get educated, to, show up for a 40-hour-a-week job and just talk to employers. They're frustrated by the fact that a lot of people just won't even show up for the job because they can make more money on welfare and other government programs. And so this is the cancer cell in our economy right now. It's the contamination of our economy, which is that we have an economy that's built on government debt and government spending and massive overtaxation. And I don't know any time in the history of the world where that has ever worked. I saw the other day, by the way, that when we get it wrong, other countries do. So in Britain, which is supposed to be a free market economy, they want to raise all the taxes there too. Soak the rich. We're going to take all the money from the rich people. That has never worked. If somebody knows of an example of where soak the rich, tax, spend, where that has actually worked, please write me a note or call in next week and tell me, because I don't know of anyone. I mean, Sweden used to be held up as an example of a socialist state that worked, but guess what? Even Sweden is moving away from socialism because they can't afford it any longer. And so if you look at this jobs report, what you're finding is that investment is down. That's in other words, let me put it like this. What is investment? It's planting the seeds for the harvest. If you don't plant the seeds, you don't get a harvest. So we're coming into winter and we haven't planted the seeds. There's no crop to come in the spring. And that scares me a whole hell of a lot because I believe we are mortgaging our future when you have a debt that is $35 trillion. And it's not the debt itself. It's the fact that we haven't bought anything of any use with that. We're building, solar panels and green energy projects, and we're giving people welfare checks, and we're relieving people of their student loans so they don't have to pay back the debts that they took on willingly. We're a country where we just feel like we can pass on our bills that we incurred ourselves to someone else. And with the national debt, what we're doing, and I think you all understand this, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent or whatever you are, you know that all you're doing is saying, hey, this debt we're going to spend now and we're going to send the bill to our kids and our grandkids. I did a video for the that you can look this up, folks. It was on PragerU, and I love PragerU videos. And this was on, how our debt was going to kill our country. And the first scene in that video, and look it up at PragerU, just as Google Stephen Moore PragerU, and you'll see that the first thing is, a new baby is born, and the two parents are handing this precious, the first breaths of this beautiful child, and the IRS, the IRS walks in and says, hands a little piece of paper to the little baby saying, here's your share of the national debt. You owe us $175,000. And that's kind of what we're doing. with our economy right now. And I'm here to tell you this is a prescription for disaster. Can Donald Trump solve the problem? I think he can. But he's not, it's such a deep hole we're in right now that he's not going to be able to solve the whole problem in 4 years. I wish I could say he will. He's not going to be able to. But he can stop the digging. He can stop digging the ditch. Kamala Harris actually believes she can balance the budget by just raising taxes on rich people. And I've said it multiple times. The math doesn't add up, Kamala. It just doesn't add up. You can't do it. And if you try to just raise taxes on the rich people, guess what? You're not going to have many rich people left to tax. They'll go to Bermuda, or they'll go to the Bahamas, or they'll go to Switzerland or some other country and avoid paying these high taxes. If you don't believe that, just look what's happening in New York and California, where people are leaving in droves to lower tax places. That's what happens. You raise taxes, people leave. So this is not the solution. The solution is to get our government spending under control. I've mentioned many times, I just can't get this guy out of my mind, Elon Musk, because I think he's the perfect person to show us how to do it, show us how to run government at half the cost. And I think most agencies could easily do that. I'm here to tell you, I think we could cut 30, 40, even 50% out of most agencies' budgets, and they could do the work that is required of them. And I think the only people who would suffer from that are people who live in the swamp of Washington, D.C. But the rest of us who live on Main Street, USA, would have a great, great benefit from that. I have to say one other quick thing. I really do hope that we see a boom again in the U.S. economy. I never root against the U.S. economy. Hopefully this 1 month of really bad jobs numbers could be followed up when Trump gets in office, if he does, with a massive, massive boom. And I really do believe we could see that cork in the champagne bottle come off. I think people are ready for it. I think having been there in Madison Square Garden, I know a lot of you listening to the show were there too. There was so much hope. There was so much hope for the future. I haven't seen that in a long time. If you vote for Kamala Harris, and you vote any way you want to, folks, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. But if you're voting for Kamala Harris, you're saying 4 more years of this. If you want that, that's what you're going to get. It might be actually a little worse because Kamala Harris is more liberal than Joe Biden. But you will get a change of course if Trump comes in. And I'm not here to tell you I agree with Trump on everything. There are a lot of things I strongly disagree with him on. I don't like tariffs, but I do think that he has a plan because he's a businessman, and Kamala has no plan because she doesn't understand business. She hates business. So which one of these two do you really think is going to create more jobs? I want to say one last thing before we break. I have a lot of respect for what has happened with respect to the Washington Post saying we're not going to endorse a candidate. I think Jeff Bezos is exactly right when he says the media has moved too far to the left and we have to represent the readers of all political spectrums. Great idea. Great idea. I wish the New York Times would do that. I wish CNN would do that. And all of the other news stations, because nobody believes the media anymore because they are so biased, and they do that at their own peril. This is the More Money Show, folks. We'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. We are ready for our second hour. We are on the WABC News Channel every Saturday afternoon, 1 to 3 p.m., same bat time, same bat channel every week. It is a privilege to be on the number one talk radio station in these United States. I just have so much fun doing this, and it's a labor of love to be able to talk to you all every week. And thank you, because our ratings are really good. And one thing about our show is we have fresh programming every week. You're not listening to a infomercial. You're not, these boring, buy this laundry detergent or something like this. And you listen to these things. And how can people listen through these long infomercials? This is no infomercial. This is fresh coverage of what's going on with the economy, what's going on with politics. Normally, I take your calls every weekend. This weekend, I'm not going to, because we have jam-packed with so much going on, with being, just 2 or 3 days from the most important election in at least 40 years. I think the Reagan-Carter election might have been more important than this one, but this is a mighty important election because you're dealing with an issue where the two candidates are so far apart in terms of how they view the world. You've got Kamala Harris, who wants to raise taxes through the roof, and then you've got Donald Trump, who is talking about a pro-growth, pro-business platform. And so I wanted to spend the first 10 minutes of this show talking about something we've touched on in previous weeks, but I want to go in depth on this. And I'm talking about tariffs and taxes. Now, tariffs, of course, are taxes, right? If you impose a tariff, that's a tax on a good or service that's coming into the United States across the border. So there's no question, it is a tax. And I don't always agree with Trump on tariffs. I am a free trade guy. I believe that countries that have open borders with respect to, allowing goods into the country, and when two countries trade together, they by definition both benefit from that trade, or they wouldn't agree to the trade. And so I do believe in free trade. My buddy Arthur Laffer always tells us that free trade is one of the pillars of prosperity, along with a sound currency, along with lower taxes, along with less regulation. Those are the kinds of policies that make a country rich over time. So I'm not a protectionist, and I don't agree with Donald Trump when he says my favorite word in the English language is tariffs. No, I don't love tariffs, but I'm going to, and by the way, last week on this show, we had Phil Gramm, the former senator from Texas, who I greatly respect. I mean, Phil Gramm is a hero to me. He basically taught me economics. He was one of the great senators of all time. He and I differ a little bit in our perspective on this issue. He's been writing a lot for the Wall Street Journal, as I do from time to time. He wrote a piece last week talking about how Trump's tariffs would be a disaster. Now, here's where I differ from my friend Phil Gramm. We are not talking about tariffs in isolation here. What Donald Trump is talking about, and I love this idea, is let's raise the tariffs on imported goods into the United States, but cut taxes on things that are made in the United States. So here is my view on this. If you're going to bring something into the United States, we're going to charge you for that. We're going to charge you a tax. But if something is made here in the United States, we're going to charge you less tax. And that's different from just saying we're going to charge all these tariffs in isolation. We are going to favor things that are made in America. And I'm okay with that. I am. I wonder if you are too. I know some people, if you're, I used to be good friends with Milton Friedman, one of the greatest economists who ever walked the earth. And I was so honored to know him when he was in his 70s, 80s, until he died in his early 90s. But he always said we should have unilateral free trade. No matter what other countries do, we should just trade with them, because bringing in low price products is a good thing for America. And there's a lot to that. But what I'm saying is, if we had a choice of buying something in the USA made with American workers and buying something in, say, China made with Chinese workers, all other things equal, it probably, I do buy America. And again, I'm a free trade guy. So my point is, and here's what I want you all to think about, because I don't know if I'm right about this. I'm going to be honest. I think I'm right, but maybe I'm not right. That what we are talking about here is moving towards a consumption tax system. And I know a lot of you who are regular listeners to this show favor the national retail sales tax. It's something I've always thought was an interesting model. In other words, let's tax people on what they consume, what they take. When you consume, you take out of the economy, not what they produce, not what they save, not what they invest, not when they create businesses. In other words, the virtue is creating products and goods and services. So why do we tax that? Why do we tax the virtue? Now, if you consume it, you should have to pay a tax on it. So you should pay a tariff, and then we should have a national sales tax on things that are made in the U.S., but no income tax, no get rid of the income tax. The income tax came in sometime in the 1910s. I forgot the exact date. It was, I believe, the 16th Amendment. I think it was one of the biggest mistakes we ever made. And what's cool is Donald Trump is saying, hey, why don't we stop taxing income and start taxing foreign products? It's an interesting idea, but everybody's going, oh my God, he's going to ruin the economy. He's going to cause a second Great Depression. Oh my God, the stock market is going to collapse. Well, first of all, this is what they said 8 years ago. Remember, folks? 2016, look it up. Oh my God, Donald Trump is going to crash the stock market. It's going to be 1929 all over again. We're going to have people, homeless in the streets. And we already have that. But, my God, we're going to have the Hoover tents that we used to have in New York City because nobody has a job. No. We're going to create more jobs under this system, create more prosperity if we tax people on their consumption at a national sales tax level, not at an income tax. So Trump has put that idea out there. Hey, let's get rid of the income tax. And I think it's a really neat idea. Now, my good friend Steve Forbes, who is often on this show, and again, Steve Forbes is one of my heroes as well. I love Steve Forbes. He's brilliant. He should have been president back in 1996 when he ran for president. But he says we should have a flat tax, a flat rate income tax. And I love that plan too. If you ask me to choose between a flat tax and a national retail sales tax in exchange for the current income tax, it's like asking me, would you rather have a Lamborghini or a Ferrari? I'll take either one of those. They would be so far superior to what we have right now. I mean, you could not devise a tax system for the United States that is dumber than the one we have right now. We tax people over and over and over and over again. And the more they work, the more they save, the more they invest, the more money they make for themselves and our economy, the more we punish them. I'm sick and tired of the Democrats saying, just tax the rich, they're terrible people. Look, we all aspire to be rich. We all aspire to make money. When you start a business, you want it to be a success. If you started a business and you didn't want to make money, I don't want to invest in that business. So why do we punish people for making money? Why do we punish people for creating jobs? Why do we punish the small businessman and woman who works their butts off 60, 70 hours a week to build up that business so they can make money, make a profit? And profit is not a 4-letter word. Profit is what makes the world go round in the United States. It's the profit motive is the most important thing that exists in economics. When you give someone an incentive to make a profit, they're going to cut their costs. They're going to give you a good price for things because they want you to buy it. And they're going to price gouge. No. If they price gouge, you're not going to buy the product, right? It's a free country. If you went to the grocery store and they said, today we're going to charge you 3 times more for bananas and, a dozen eggs and that ground beef. Then you say, okay, I'm not going to go to Safeway. I'm going to go to Giant, or I'm going to go to, Winn-Dixie or another grocery store. That's the wonderful thing about the free enterprise system. It's based on your free choice. And the government is in so many ways taking that away from you. So let me just summarize that, because this is an important economic message. And I'd love to hear from you folks. Maybe we can take calls on this next week. Do you favor what I'm talking about? Moving towards taxing consumption, which would include a tariff when things come into the United States, but then relieving the tax on workers and businesses and savers and senior citizens. I'm in favor of that. I think I am. You could talk me out of it, though, folks. I think I'm in favor of that model. I know my friend Phil Gramm would be grimacing as I say this, but if you're going to have a consumption tax, you have to tax things that come in across the border. So, in other words, if you have a national retail sales tax, when you buy the product that comes in from China, you're going to pay a tax on it when you buy it. It makes more sense to me. And then guess what? We wouldn't have to have 80,000 IRS agents. We could have 8,000, not 80,000 agents. It would be simple. You wouldn't have April 15th as a day that you'd have to dread. I get excited about this kind of thing. I think the American economy would boom if we did that. And I think you'd see so many jobs and so much capital flow into the United States. Can you imagine any country in the world trying to compete with America if we had no income tax? You kidding me? No corporate tax, no business tax, and no direct income tax? I mean, we would blow everyone else away. And the people would benefit the most from this are not the rich. They'd be people at the bottom of the ladder. We'd have so many jobs in this country, we wouldn't know what to do with all the jobs we'd have. So that is an exciting idea. One quick thing before we take our break. And I know I'm running over a little bit here, but Have you noticed how the left loves to talk? There's too much. Remember they say too much money in politics, too much. We got to put restraints on how much money people can donate. They're flooding with rich people giving all this money to the Republicans, and we got to stop. We have to have campaign finance reform. We got to put limits on what people can give. Have you heard Democrats talking about that in the last 4, 6, 8 years? Have you heard them? Remember, they used to talk about that every election. Oh my God, these greedy Republicans, they're buying elections. Well, I was just looking at the numbers. The Democrats this election in House races are spending 3 times, triple what Republicans are spending. Kamala Harris will probably end up spending double when you include all the outside money that's running into that presidential race. She'll probably spend twice as much money as Donald Trump and Republicans. In local races, I've never seen so much money. I live in a competitive congressional district in the D.C. area. Oh, my God, every time I turn on the TV, it's an ad for the Democrats. Now, what I'm saying is Democrats don't complain about too much money anymore in politics because they get all the big money, because they got the millionaires and billionaires behind them that are writing these 6, 7, in some cases 8-figure checks. Now, one thing that does bother me about all the money in the politics is I am worried about foreign money from China and Japan and Middle East, the Saudis coming in and influencing our elections. I think that's a big problem. And I suspect when people ask me, where does all this Democratic money come up from, this mountain of money, I do suspect that a lot of it is coming in from foreign governments that obviously the foreign governments want Kamala Harris to be president. They don't want Donald Trump to be president. I laughed when I heard Kamala Harris say, all the foreign leaders are for me. Of course they are, Kamala, because you're a pushover. You're a pansy. You're going to let them have whatever they want. Trump is the one who's going to put America first. You're not going to do that. You're going to put all our enemies first. You're going to shut down American energy. You're not going to let us mine for minerals here. You're going to put massive tax on America. Who do you think benefits from that? Oh, yeah, Russia, China, the Iranians, the Iraqis, the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia. We're playing right into their hands. And so this is an election that really needs to be determined, not just by your own personal pocketbook, but the balance sheet of the United States government. And I'm here to tell you, if we continue to borrow $2 trillion a year, and if you think that Kamala Harris is going to eliminate that deficit that we run every year by just taxing rich people, you are living in some kind of a twilight zone. Because even if you took every single penny from every person who makes over $1 million, you can't balance the budget. What we have to do is grow our economy, cut for the wasteful spending as Elon Musk wants to do. Let's have a saner tax plan. Let's not have the government tell you what you can and can't buy. I'm going to buy, sorry, Joe, sorry, Kamala, I'm going to buy whatever kind of car I damn want to, and you're not going to prevent me from doing it. Folks, we've got some great guests coming up on the show. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I'm so pleased to have one of my heroes on, and I'm talking about Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, who did an amazing job reforming that great state. Governor, thanks so much for joining.
Hey, Steve. Glad to be on with you.
So tell us what you're doing with Young Americans for Freedom.
Well, we're training the next generation of leaders in the fight for freedom. So we're programs, conferences. We have kids out at the Reagan Ranch, the Reagan Boy at Home, the National and Washington, D.C., more campus lectures than anyone else in the country. And we put
I've done some of those. I've done a number of
those. Spectacular part of that.
It's amazing. It's just amazing the turnout you get and a lot of them come up and say, gee, I've never heard these ideas before.
Well, it's exactly right, because we take those and then we broadcast them. We have on YAF TV, our YouTube channel, we have more than 1.7 million subscribers.
Oh, my gosh.
Last year we exceeded 1.4 billion views. So there's a hunger out there. In fact, people are interested in YF.org. You don't have to be a kid to watch all that good stuff, but if you have one, get them pointed in our direction.
Yeah, you don't have to. I mean, I think adults benefit from those lectures as much as anyone. So congratulations on the amazing job you've done with YAF. I know you have Art Laffer, who's my co-author of my book, the Trump economic miracle, and one of the most famous economists in the world. Who are some of the other people that you get to speak on campuses, including yourself, of course?
Tremendous mix of folks. So I said it goes from Ben to Ben. So from Ben Shapiro, who talks extra fast, to Ben Carson, who's a little bit slower pace, both of which are equally as profound. Mike Pompeo, we get along with Katie Pavlich, all sorts of folks, from Fox and Newsmax, right, but also podcasts, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, just this long array of really outstanding folks, and particularly those ones I mentioned who are big on podcasts. Those are extremely popular with students on campus. We'll get anywhere from hundreds to thousands that watch in person, and then like a Ben Shapiro might honestly get, one of our YouTube broadcasts had as many as 28 million people watch a YouTube wow. short of him. So it's big numbers.
God, that's amazing. Well, let's talk about campuses for a minute then. It looked like we were making a lot of progress on campuses, in the last 20 years. And then we saw the craziness of what happened, over the last recent months, where I don't know if maybe it's just the left makes more noise, but I think people were so discouraged about what they saw in terms of the protests and so on.
Right, all the encampments.
And look, I think everybody has a right to protest. I'm a big, and as you are, I look, everyone has a right to protest, and you can take whatever position you want. But I think that they've just shutting down the campuses was really outrageous.
Well, particularly when, for example, I know this well, at the University of Wisconsin, all the campuses in my state, it's against the law. The state statutes explicitly prohibit overnight camping on campuses right. without approval. And so many of these chancellors and leaders just let students, because of their, siding with many of their beliefs, take over these campuses, run roughshod, and yeah. avoid the law. I'm like you. You want to hold a protest? Go ahead. I had 100,000 protested. I didn't block them from
right.
protesting.
You know what that's
capital.
like, right? Right.
Yeah. You can protest, but don't block. Particularly troubling is, we have UCLA, as an example, had a big encampment. The leader of our YAF chapter there, or YF chapter, Matt Weinberg, is a Jewish student. He was blocked from going to class. That's a whole different thing than protesting. You intimidate, you stop, you threaten the safety of other students on campus. That is dead wrong. We have to push back on that. The good news is we do continuous polling of college and high school age students, and that's not reflective of the nationwide. That is just like it is in the electorate, radicals who get all the attention from so much of the media, when in reality, most students are just trying to figure it out, like most voters are.
So I'm talking to Governor Scott Walker, who was governor for 8 years in Wisconsin and did so much to turn around that state. He is one of my heroes. I think if you're a conservative, he's got to be one of your heroes as well. One of the interesting things that you did, Governor, is you ran against Donald J. Trump in 2016 in the presidential race. And I don't know how well you've gotten to know Donald Trump, but it was, who would have thought when we had that amazing field of incredibly great Republicans, probably the best field we ever had, with people like you and Jeb Bush and so many people I admire, Ben Carson. And out of that field comes Donald Trump. Who would have ever thought it? But what do you think? I mean, you've seen it all firsthand. Now he may be on the cusp of one of the greatest political comebacks in American history. What is it about him that attracts so many millions of Americans?
Well, he's the real deal. I mean, good,
right.
bad, and everything in between.
Yeah,
there's times when I wish he wasn't entirely himself, when he'd tone it a little bit, I would say a little bit of Reagan, he'd be in a landslide, but that's not him. He is who he is. And so I loved this week, when he was in Green Bay, that's the night when he pulled out of the garbage truck. And I just said that it not just him doing
he's a real showman, isn't he?
Oh, and then coming up on stage and just the pure self-awareness of him joking about, still wearing that vest up on stage, to me just was like, particularly for young people, it's authentic. He said, they tell you I look skinny, I look thinner, so I'm going to wear this. People get that. They understand that they're tired of politicians just saying whatever they need to think. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very appealing. Again, there are times when he says other things, I'm like, oh, please, Mr. President, just rein it in a little bit. But I love more than anything, I think you do too, is He's not intimidated. We need somebody in Washington who's just going to take on the establishment, take on the mess. We've had high taxes and high spending, out of control government, and we just need to rein that in. And I think that's what the voters in the primary certainly found appealing. I was smart. I got out before I got a nickname. I could see where things were headed. But along the way, I just think that's been incredibly impactful. The one thing I'll say again when I'm rallying with them, even tonight, is life was better when Ronald Reagan was president. That's just an undisputed truth. Prices were lower. The border was more secure. Public safety was less of a concern. Life was better when Trump was president.
Yeah, no question about that. And that's what I have a book out now. You're probably familiar with it that Laffer and I just wrote about, called The Trump Economic Miracle. And we show statistically, no matter what statistic you want to look at, the things were a lot better. So we're not making this stuff up. So how does, I got to ask you, Governor, how does Wisconsin, my prediction is whoever wins Wisconsin may well be the winner of this election. So I know you still, go ahead.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. Yeah, you're dead on. And that is the closest of swing states out there. In the last two elections, less than 25,000 votes out of a state of nearly 6 million was the difference between Trump winning and then the second time Biden winning. And that was the key. If he'd won, whoever won Wisconsin, each of those two elections carried the vote, carried the day. And my hope is it is razor thin again. My hope is that there's enough people in Wisconsin like me who've seen my gas go up $1.25, a gallon over the last 4 years, who've seen our kids' mortgage go up by nearly $1,000 a month, who've seen all these other concerns out there, that's enough. Because the flip side is the left has got a huge financial advantage. Packers games, they must run 10 or 12 more ads per Trump ad than on the Harris side than they do on the Trump side. And yet we're still in the thick of it because the issues matter. Yeah,
I was just at a wedding outside of Philadelphia 2 weekends ago, and we turned on, one of the football games. And I experienced the same thing. I don't know where the left gets so much money. I don't know where the Democrats get it, but it would seem like there were 3 times as many ads for Kamala Harris as they were for Trump. And so we're being outgunned money-wise, probably 2-1, and even in the congressional races too. Where do you think they get so much money?
Oh, I think for all the talk of unity and joy, it's pure hatred for Donald Trump. Most of it driven by the elected officials, by the fact that he just outpaces them, that they can't stand somebody that they can't control, that they can't intimidate, and then I think that's reflected then in all the things they say and do. For a couple days after that egregious first attempted assassination, we saw momentarily a little bit of easing, but since then it's only gotten worse. And again, so we can relate to. We understand that in Wisconsin. You remember at the height of the protests and the riots,
I do.
Occupation of our capital. They called me Hitler. They called me Nazis. That sort of stuff. But when you start saying things, going beyond just that, but saying, the fate of the world is dependent on, not just I disagree, things are going to go in the wrong direction, but you send these signals to people that somehow, this is, again, there's no question why they use the word Hitler. I would never use that. Hitler was the evil incarnate here in this world. I don't want anyone, I don't want any of my political opponents to be in that category, because that's just a whole different universe. But that's
so you just mentioned
how they raise all this money.
You just mentioned something that, I'll never forget, which is when you were governor and so courageously stood up for your values and the principles and positions you'd taken. And for those who are not familiar or don't remember this, you had a storming of the Capitol and basically an occupation of the Capitol. And I don't recall the press calling that an insurrection.
No, in fact, Pelosi actually tweeted about it, encouraging the people who are doing it. So the irony is, I remember Mark Thiessen wrote a piece a few years later saying, Democrats were for occupying a Capitol.
I know.
They were against it.
And by the way, that your life was threatened, right?
Repeatedly.
Yeah.
Death threats against me, my family, my wife. One said they were going to gut my wife like a deer. It was horrible. But it was all about intimidation.
How long did that last?
Well, the protest itself in the Capitol was just shy of a month. So much different than just shy of a month. And then
a month.
Really, the ongoing protest lasted all the way through the recall election.
Oh, my God. Amazing. Well, one last question on the way out, Governor. Well, two last quick questions. We got about literally a minute and a half left. Number one, what is the first thing that you think Donald Trump should do when he wins and gets into office?
Well, I'd love to have an order to just release a major part of the bureaucracy in Washington, but that won't happen in the first moment. But I'd love for him to take action on the border. I think right now, restoring all the things that he had put in place before, the executive actions that Biden and Harris took apart. Obviously, you and I are economic advocates, and there's a long list of things I want him to do, including cutting more taxes. But I think right away, get that border secure as quick as you can.
Well, I guarantee you he's going to do that. And then second question is, how do people find out more? Are you a 501c3 at Young Americans?
We are.
How can people find out more and donate to your amazingly important cause?
YAF.org, YF.org. Or if you like the Reagan movie, we actually have a site that takes you to all the stuff we did with the Reagan movie, ReaganRanch.com. All those outdoor scenes were filmed at the ranch where our kids get to go all the time.
Thank you, Governor. That's Governor Scott Walker, the great former governor of the state of Wisconsin, and someone who is running one of the most important organizations in America. It's YAF.org?
Yep.
YAF.org. Okay, thank you very much, folks. This is the More Money Show, and we'll be right back.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. We are the number one talk radio station in these United States. And the purpose of this show is to help you make more money. And there's nobody I can think of who is better at advising on that than my longtime friend, Rob Arnott, who is the CEO of Research Affiliates. He has over $100 billion under management and is super smart when it comes to making money. So, Rob, thanks for joining.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's get right down to it. We've had a good market, for the last few years. And I guess let's just get right down to it. I mean, is this going to live on? Does it matter who wins the election?
One thing that surprises a lot of people, and we've written a white paper on this, where we entitled Polarization Trumps Politics. And what we find is something very interesting, and that is the closeness of the election matters far more than who wins. Why would that be?
Yeah.
If you have a polarized electorate and both sides are terrified that the other side's going to win,
right?
Then what happens? Both sides go risk off because they're afraid. And as the election...
Wait, hold on. Would you say both sides do what?
Go risk off. They take risk off the table. They sell stocks, for instance. And the result is that as the election comes very close, typically within the last week before the election,
right,
the outcome becomes a little bit more evident. That is to say, the odds start to skew one way or the other.
Right, and that certainly happened.
What that means is that one side is no longer quite so afraid and starts to buy, and the other side is still terrified and they already sold. So what you wind up with is, in a polarized election, about 8 times out of 10, it's not 100%, about 8 times out of 10, stocks rally in that last week and continue rallying no matter who wins for 4 to 6 weeks after that. Typical rise is about 5% in 5 or 6 weeks. That's not bad.
So what happens? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I understand what you're saying, but then you sometimes do get surprises. We had a big surprise in 2016, right, where Trump was not, he was given about a 20% chance of winning, and he did win. And so then what happens when you get a shock like that?
Well, one side or the other is going to wind up being pleased and will be happily buying. So you usually do get a run-up. The one notable exception in the last quarter century was, of course, 2000. The market tanked because the election was undecided. And there's a risk of that again this time, but I don't think of it as a high risk. I think by the end of next week we'll know who won.
So just so I understand what you're saying, so if I'm a Democrat and Biden wins, you're saying I'm more likely to buy. If I'm a Republican and Trump wins, I'm more likely to buy. So people are buying stocks based on their political leanings?
Yeah. Not everybody, but enough people to move the market.
Right.
Now, it does make a difference who wins. What we find is that if it's a trifecta, if it's President, House, and Senate, and it's a Democratic trifecta, the rally stalls. The market kind of goes sideways for a few weeks instead of up. And if it's a Republican trifecta, on average, there's about an 8% rally. So trifectas matter. But if it's a divided government, you wind up, firstly, politically, you wind up with not a lot getting done, which is not a bad thing. And secondly, you wind up with that modest 5% rally. That's the average outcome. And I've actually played this in my personal portfolio over the years in other countries too. Taiwan has had some highly polarized elections, so has England. And in most countries, when it's a polarized election with an uncertain outcome, the markets rally in the days ahead of the election and in the first handful of weeks after. Now
are these?
Said, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because this is fascinating. So you're talking about these sort of short-term effects. By the way, we're only 2 days from an election right now, so
exactly.
A lot of those effects have already been felt. But are you saying that these are these just temporary effects, or do they? In other words, is it just for say a few weeks after the election, then it washes out, or how does it play out?
This is a short-term effect, and basically what I'm saying is if you're worried about the market or the economy and thinking about selling, don't sell in a panic now. Average out of your position, trim it in the weeks ahead. Don't be in a rush because stocks do generally, with 70 to 80% odds, do pretty well in the last week before an election and in the first 4 to 6 weeks after. It's fairly reliable.
And so you're saying like the day after the election might be a good time to buy stock, regardless of who wins. As long as we know who wins. Rob, we may not know who wins for a week or 10 days. Who knows?
We probably won't know for a few days unless it's really not very close. I mean, people on both sides are saying there's going to be a surprise. It's not going to be close. Well, that might be true, in which case we might know on Wednesday. More likely we'll know Friday or the following Monday. Slight chance it could take longer than that, like it did in 2020 or worse in 2000. But remember, 2000 was a razor's edge election, and I remember Wall Street Journal did a report where they looked at all of the ways to count hanging chads and all of that nonsense.
I remember that.
And they found that depending on how you counted it, in most ways of counting it, Bush won, and in some ways Gore won. And what was quite hilarious was the way that the Bush team wanted them counted. Gore would have won, and vice versa.
Well, that was that was like flipping two coins and them both landing on top of each other.
Exactly.
What about just generally? Let's put politics aside then, and talk about. Well, first of all, if Trump wins, because I think right now that's more likely than not, but anything could happen.
That is more likely than not.
So, my friends at the Wall Street Journal have been hyperventilating about his tariff policy. I was saying earlier on the show, and I would love your reaction to this. I said, well, I'm not a tariff guy either. You and I are both free traders. But on the other hand, if you were to if you can't just look at his tariffs in isolation, he's now talking about saying, okay, we'll raise money from tariffs, but we'll use that money to, say, reduce income taxes. And in that
Which
case,
I think would be very cool.
Yeah, me too. And so I was wondering, and I that was kind of my lecture today on the show earlier. And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, any way that you tax consumption rather than income, it's actually better. Better for the economy. Money we don't spend, what are we doing with it? Maybe we're parking it in a bank, in which case it makes its way into the business community. Maybe we're investing it. Either way, it's investment in the nation's future. And why on earth would we want less of that? So tariffs, I'm not a fan of tariffs, but, everybody sees this in black and white. And I think a 5 or 10% across the board tariff would be a speed bump to discourage, to help avoid U.S.-based businesses going out of business because of a temporary blip in the currency exchange rates, and so it'll.
So wait! Time out, Rob. Time out. Because this is an important point you're making. I want to make sure everybody understands. So you're saying, let's say you had a 10% across the board tariff. I'm just, who knows where.
High end of my comfort zone, but
let's say 5, 6, 7%. So you're saying that would obviously at the margin encourage more domestic production and discourage imports. But then you said there would be a dollar adjustment. Explain that.
Economics has the concept of comparative advantage. If I'm better at producing one product, say investment management, and you're better at producing another product, radio show, then it's better off if I stick with what I'm good at and you stick with what you're good at. And the same thing holds true of nations. So if an emerging country without a lot of technology is good at producing manganese, and we're good at producing super chips, then it makes sense for us to do the latter and them to do the former. And where it gets a little tricky is, let's take China and the U.S. If China produces cars and sells them here, and we produce cars and sell them there, then we've got similar product. And if there's a 10% tariff, then Chinese companies undercutting U.S. companies and putting them out of business would be just a little bit harder.
Right.
Now, if the U.S. is not competitive, is not good at producing cars, as an example, then eventually the business should go over to them, and a 10% tariff won't discourage that or won't prevent that. It'll just slow it down a little. If we're good at producing cars, then why on earth would we want that capability to go away?
Okay, I'm talking to Rob Arnott, who is the CEO of Research Affiliates, one of the smartest guys I know about making money. Overall, what countries do you like right now?
I think the U.S. is the most expensive stock market in the world. So while I spoke a moment ago about in and around an election is not a good time to sell, what I would say is the U.S. is expensive, and so taking some of our gains and redeploying them in non-U.S. markets can be a very good idea.
And which ones do you like?
I don't really cherry pick them. If you look at the broad swath of non-U.S. developed economy markets, you've got Australia, New Zealand, you've got Japan, you've got Europe, Western Europe. For the most part, almost all of these are very cheap relative to the U.S. Now, is that
based on their PE ratios, or how are you?
Price to earnings ratios, dividend yields. The U.S. stock market's dividend yield is only 1.3%. That means in a static economy, you'd have to wait 70 years to get your money back if you relied on dividends.
Right.
In Europe, the yield is ballpark of 3%. So that's not super cheap, but that's not bad. And in emerging markets, it's 4%. Again, not bad. And emerging markets are indeed growing still faster than the developed world. So broadly, I would say investing in emerging markets, investing in international markets makes sense. All over the world, value is really cheap relative to growth stocks. By value, I mean stocks trading at low PE ratios and high dividend yields. And so we think that on a 10-year basis, U.S. stocks are priced to give us 3 to 5%, non-U.S. stocks 8 to 10%, and non-U.S. value stocks. If you get 14%, you double your money every 5 years. If you get 3 to 5%, it takes a lot longer.
Just my wife and I have bought a lot of NVIDIA stock, and we've done really well on that. We bought a decent amount of Google stock. We've done pretty well with that. So we like the technology industries, but they're very pricey now. So
they
what do you
very
think?
Pricey.
So do you?
My attitude on that would be really simple. Why don't you take out your initial investment and start playing with most money on the rest?
Okay, that's a great investment advice. Finally, okay, you're Donald Trump's economic advisor, and you are. I know you're not, but if you were, what would you tell him to do? What would be the most important? If you were president, what would be the most important thing for our country to do to reclaim the strong economic growth that this country deserves?
Here's an interesting point. Deficit spending is not a good thing. Deficits matter, but deficits have two components: high spending and low taxes. The answer of the left is, well, let's raise the taxes. The answer on the right is let's cut the spending. We've actually done studies where we find that the more a country spends, the slower its economic growth. We think that's the essential problem in Europe.
Yes.
And it's a huge relationship. It's a 70% correlation between the amount of government spends and the rate of macroeconomic growth. So the easiest way to speed up growth is slash government spending.
Who used to say
Congress, but that would be good.
Yeah. Who used to tell me that all the time before he died was Milton Friedman. I used to ask him, what's the most important thing to get economic growth? And he said, we got to cut government spending and get it out of the way. So, Rob, I think you echo one of the greatest economists who ever lived. That's Rob Arnott, who is the chairman of Research Affiliates. Rob, I hope you'll come on again sometime soon. We learned a lot from you.
Very happy to do it.
Thank you, Rob. And we will be right back for some final words on the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. Well, here we are. It's been 2 hours. I've had a great time. I hope you've had a great time. I've learned a lot. I hope you've learned a lot. This is an incredibly important time for our country. I want to make sure that everyone does vote. I don't even care who you vote for, but get out and vote. It is your citizen duty. And I think I have faith that the American people have the wisdom to make the right choices. And that's what makes America great. And even if we lose, it's not the end of the world. It may feel like the end of the world for me because I feel so strongly about the opportunities we have if Donald Trump is elected. But the life will go on one way or the other. I hope it isn't that close. I hope we have a winner that we can all agree who the winner is. I don't want to fight about that anymore. But we're a democracy. We're a representative form of government. We're the strongest country in the world. God bless America. We will retain our status as the global economic superpower because we have to. If it's not going to be the United States, who else will it be? Have a great weekend, folks.